Andrew Jackson, the misfire. January 30th, 1835. The first assassination attempt on a sitting U.S. president didn't happen in the 20th century. It happened on the steps of the United States Capitol building in broad daylight, 186 years before anyone had heard of the Secret Service. President Andrew Jackson was leaving the funeral of South Carolina Congressman Warren Davis when a man named Richard Lawrence stepped out from the crowd, raised a pistol, and pulled the trigger from 8 feet away. The gun misfired. Lawrence immediately drew a second pistol. He'd brought a backup, and pulled that trigger too. That one misfired as well. At this point, 67-year-old Andrew Jackson, President of the United States, war hero, a man who had survived a duel, 2 bullets already lodged in his body from previous altercations, charged Lawrence with his walking cane. Jackson had to be physically restrained by his aides from beating the man to death in front of the Capitol building. Both guns were later tested by Army ordnance experts. Both functioned perfectly. The odds of a double misfire with those specific percussion cap pistols in those conditions were later calculated at approximately 1 in 125,000. Lawrence was found not guilty by reason of insanity, the first such verdict in American history, and spent the rest of his life in psychiatric institutions. He believed he was Richard III, King of England, and that Jackson had prevented him from claiming his rightful fortune. Jackson, for his part, decided for the rest of his life that the whole thing had been a political conspiracy orchestrated by his enemies. No amount of evidence ever convinced him otherwise. Abraham Lincoln. The attempt before the assassination. August 1864. Most people know how Lincoln died. Fewer people know he almost didn't make it to the end of his first term. August 1864, Washington, D.C. Lincoln is riding alone on horseback from the White House to his summer cottage at the Soldiers' Home, a 3-mile route he took most evenings without escort because he hated the formality of a security detail. This was Lincoln's thing. He routinely dismissed his guards, wandered the city alone, answered the door of the White House himself late at night. His Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, described trying to protect Lincoln as one of the most frustrating experiences of his professional life. That August night, a shot rang out from the darkness near the Soldiers' Home. Lincoln's horse bolted and galloped the remaining distance to the cottage at full speed. When he arrived, his hat was missing. He'd lost it during the ride. The next morning, someone found the stovepipe hat on the road. It had a bullet hole through the crown. Lincoln told the story like it was a minor inconvenience. He asked the soldiers at the cottage not to tell Mary about it. He retrieved the hat, acknowledged there was a hole in it, and his theory was that someone had accidentally discharged a rifle. He may have been right. He may have been wrong. He was shot dead in a theater 7 months later by someone who had planned it for weeks. So we'll never know how seriously to take the August incident. What we do know is that Lincoln's entire presidency was a sustained exercise in how many times one man could be almost killed before the one time he wasn't. Theodore Roosevelt. The speech. October 14th, 1912. Here's where things get genuinely unbelievable. Theodore Roosevelt, 54 years old, is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, campaigning for a 3rd presidential term as the candidate for the Progressive Party. He's not a sitting president at this point. He left office in 1909, but the attempt still belongs here because it is, without question, the most remarkable physical response to being shot in the history of American political violence. Roosevelt is climbing into an open car outside his hotel when a saloon keeper named John Schrank steps forward from the crowd and shoots him in the chest from 10 feet away. The bullet passes through Roosevelt's steel eyeglass case and the folded-up 50-page speech manuscript in his breast pocket before entering his chest and lodging in his ribcage. Roosevelt reaches into his shirt, looks at his fingers, decides he's not coughing blood, and determines he's probably not dying. He then delivers the 90-minute speech anyway. "Ladies and gentlemen," he tells the crowd, "I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose." He spoke for the full hour and a half with a bullet in his chest, pausing at one point to show the audience the blood-stained manuscript, noting that the thick paper probably saved his life. When he finally agreed to go to the hospital, doctors decided the bullet was too close to his ribcage to safely remove and left it there. Roosevelt carried it for the rest of his life, which turned out to be another 7 years. He lost the 1912 election, by the way. Woodrow Wilson won. Roosevelt finished second. Schrank, who claimed the ghost of President McKinley had appeared to him in a dream and told him to prevent Roosevelt from serving a 3rd term, was found not guilty by reason of insanity and institutionalized for life. Franklin Roosevelt. Wrong man. February 15th, 1933. Franklin Roosevelt wasn't even inaugurated yet. He was president-elect, 11 days from taking office, when a bricklayer named Giuseppe Zangara opened fire on his open motorcade in Miami's Bayfront Park. Zangara fired 5 shots. He hit 5 people. Roosevelt was not one of them. Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak, who happened to be standing near the motorcade, was struck by a bullet that was almost certainly intended for Roosevelt. Cermak died 19 days later. 4 other bystanders were wounded, none fatally. What's striking about the Zangara case is the simplicity of what stopped him. A woman in the crowd named Lillian Cross grabbed Zangara's arm as he fired, a split-second instinct that almost certainly deflected the shots away from Roosevelt. She later told reporters she didn't think, she just reacted. Zangara, when arrested, expressed no remorse and explained his motive with remarkable bluntness. He hated rich people and powerful men. He'd always hated them. He'd tried to get close to the King of Italy once and failed, and this was his second attempt. He went to the electric chair 33 days after the shooting, making him one of the fastest executions in Florida's history. He reportedly complained about the slowness of American justice right up until they threw the switch. Roosevelt, who watched the entire thing from the car, was described by witnesses as visibly unmoved. When Cermak was carried past him bleeding, Roosevelt ordered his driver to stop and held Kermak's hand on the way to the hospital. A man had just tried to kill him and hit someone else, and Roosevelt's response was to comfort the unintended victim. Harry Truman, the gunfight at Blair House. November 1st, 1950. This one turns into a full gunfight in front of the president's temporary residence. In the middle of the afternoon, the White House was undergoing major renovation in 1950, so Harry Truman was living at Blair House, directly across Pennsylvania Avenue. 2 Puerto Rican nationalists named Griselio Torresola and Oscar Collazo decided this was the moment to assassinate the president and draw attention to the Puerto Rican independence movement. Their plan was to rush the front entrance, overwhelm the guards, and get to Truman. At 2:20 p.m., while Truman was upstairs taking a nap, they attacked simultaneously from opposite directions. What followed was a 40-second gunfight on the sidewalk outside Blair House, involving 5 Secret Service agents and White House police officers. Torresola killed Officer Leslie Caufelt with a shot to the abdomen and wounded 2 other officers. But Caufelt, mortally wounded, propped himself against a booth, steadied himself, and shot Torresola in the head. Torresola died instantly. Collazo was wounded and captured. Truman walked to the window when the shooting started, looked out, and a Secret Service agent screamed at him to get back. He got back. The whole thing lasted less than a minute. Officer Caufelt died 4 hours later and is the only Secret Service officer killed in the line of duty defending a president. Collazo was sentenced to death, but Truman commuted it to life imprisonment. Jimmy Carter pardoned him in 1979. He lived to be 80. Truman later called it the longest day of his life, which says something, given that he was also the president who authorized the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. John F. Kennedy, Miami, 1963. November 18, 1963. 4 days before Dallas, there was Miami. JFK was scheduled to ride in an open motorcade through Miami on November 18, 1963. A man named Gilberto Lopez, and possibly other individuals connected to a broader plot, had been identified by informants and were believed to be planning an attack along the motorcade route. The Secret Service received specific intelligence that the president's life was in danger in Miami. The motorcade was canceled, and Kennedy flew directly to his speaking engagement instead. 4 days later, in Dallas, the motorcade wasn't canceled. The Miami plot is one of those historical near misses that history largely skipped over because of what came after it. The full details remained classified for decades. What investigators and historians have pieced together suggests that November 18, 1963, could have been the date that changed everything, and almost nobody knows it happened. What happened in Dallas 4 days later is one of the most documented events in American history, and Kennedy did not survive it. But the Miami plot matters because it raises the question that always follows these cases. If the system worked on the 18th, why didn't it work on the 22nd? Nobody has ever given a fully satisfying answer to that. Richard Nixon, The Plane, 1974. This one almost nobody talks about, partly because the full story didn't fully emerge for years. In February 1974, a 22-year-old U.S. Army private named Robert Preston stole a helicopter from Fort Meade and flew it toward the White House. He flew low over the South grounds before Secret Service and military personnel opened fire, forcing him to land. He was wounded. The White House was not significantly damaged. Nixon was not there at the time. But the stranger, darker attempt on Nixon came from a man named Samuel Bick, who in February 1974 attempted to hijack a Delta Airlines flight at Baltimore-Washington International Airport with the intention of crashing the plane into the White House to kill Nixon. Bike shot and killed the airport security guard at the gate, boarded the plane, and shot both pilots, killing the co-pilot. He then ordered a passenger to fly the plane. The passenger was not a pilot. Police arrived, shot Bike through the plane's door, and Bike shot himself. The plane never left the ground. Bike had been sending rambling cassette tapes to political figures, including news anchor Jack Anderson and composer Leonard Bernstein, for months, explaining exactly what he planned to do in explicit detail. He'd previously tried to approach Nixon at a public event with a gun and been stopped. He was on the Secret Service's radar. The January 6th committee, decades later, cited Bike as a historic example of public advance warning of political violence going inadequately acted upon. Nixon resigned from the presidency 6 months after Bike's death. He was never told the full details of how close a commercial airliner came to being flown into the building where he worked and lived. Gerald Ford, twice. In 17 days, September 1975. Gerald Ford is the only president in American history to survive 2 assassination attempts in the same month. Both happened in California. Both involved women. Both came within seconds of succeeding. September 5, 1975. Sacramento. Ford is walking across Capitol Park toward the California State Legislature when a woman named Lynette Squeaky Fromm, a member of Charles Manson's family, steps out of the crowd 2 feet away and raises a .45 caliber pistol directly at Ford's stomach. The gun has 4 rounds in the magazine. The chamber is empty. Fromm had loaded the magazine but never chambered a round, meaning the weapon couldn't fire. A Secret Service agent grabbed the gun from her hand before she could work the slide. Ford later wrote that he looked directly into her eyes in the moment before the agent moved, and described them as vacant. 17 days later, September 22nd, San Francisco. A woman named Sarah Jane Moore, standing 40 feet from Ford outside the St. Francis Hotel, fires a .38 caliber revolver at the president. The shot is deflected by a man named Oliver Sipple, a former Marine who grabbed Moore's arm as she fired. The bullet hit a wall and a fragment wounded a bystander. Moore got off a second shot before being subdued. She later told reporters she had aimed at the wrong spot and that if she'd adjusted, she would have hit him. Fromm served 34 years in federal prison before being paroled in 2009. Moore served 32 years before her parole in 2007. Ford outlived both attempts by 31 years, dying in 2006 at the age of 93. He remains the longest-lived president in American history. When reporters asked him years later how he felt about having been shot at twice in 2.5 weeks, he said he felt lucky. Bill Clinton, the rifle and the plane. 1994. Clinton had 2 serious attempts in the same year, and one of them is almost completely forgotten. September 12, 1994. A man named Frank Corder steals a small Cessna 150 aircraft from a Maryland airport and flies it directly into the south lawn of the White House at approximately 1:49 a.m., crashing into the base of the building below the president's bedroom. Corder died in the crash. The White House sustained damage to its exterior. The Clintons were not at the White House that night. They were staying at Blair House. The crash killed only Corder. Then, October 29, 1994. A man named Francisco Martin Duran stands on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House and opens fire with a semi-automatic rifle, firing 29 rounds into the building's facade over approximately 8 seconds before bystanders tackle him. Men in suits on the lawn scatter. A Secret Service agent draws his weapon. Duran is subdued by 3 tourists, private citizens who happened to be standing on the sidewalk, before Secret Service could reach him. Clinton was inside the White House and was never in direct physical danger. Duran told investigators he was trying to destroy a mist he believed connected an alien presence to a man in a gray suit standing near the White House. He received 40 years in federal prison. The tourists who tackled him received no official recognition for months, until the story resurfaced in the press and embarrassed the White House into acknowledging them. George W. Bush. The grenade. May 10, 2005. This one most Americans have never heard of, even though it happened on live television. George W. Bush is giving a speech in Freedom Square in Tbilisi, Georgia, the country, not the state, in front of a crowd of thousands, including Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili. A man named Vladimir Aryutin throws a live Soviet-era RGD-5 hand grenade directly into the crowd approximately 100 feet from the podium where Bush is standing. The grenade lands near the stage, bounces once, and stops. It does not explode. The red plaid handkerchief Aretunian had wrapped around it to slow the throw had prevented the safety pin from fully releasing. The grenade was functional, loaded, and live. The pin had simply not disengaged all the way. Nobody in the crowd realized what had happened. The speech continued. The grenade sat on the ground near the stage for several minutes before Georgian security spotted it, covered it, and removed it. Bush was informed after he left the stage. Aretunian evaded capture for 3 months. When Georgian police finally closed in on him, he shot and killed a Georgian Interior Ministry officer before being captured. He was sentenced to life in prison and is serving that sentence today. The Secret Service later described the Tbilisi grenade as one of the closest successful deployments of a lethal weapon near a U.S. president in modern history. A functioning grenade was thrown 100 feet from George W. Bush's face. A folded handkerchief is why he's alive.